For those of you that I don't know, I'm Jennifer Gafford, one of the clinical assistant faculty for counseling psychology, and I just wanted to welcome you and thank you for being here. This is the first time that we've had more of an integrated panel, and so I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves and turn it over to the two doctoral students who've really been responsible. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves and then introduce the panel, and we'll take it from there. This is we have a full hour, and they're going to moderate for us, and we want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we'll start on time and finish on time. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Go ahead. All right, hi. Some of you I might know. My name is Anna Edelman. I am a third-year doctoral student in the counseling psychology program. And Elise and I recognized last year that a lot of our master's students were starting to apply to doctoral programs with a lot of questions and not probably feeling as prepared as they could have, and so we wanted to put some support measures in for that. So our plan now is to have one in the fall that's more of an informational session, and then another panel in the spring that's a lot more about the application process itself, discerning where to apply, how to apply, recommendations, all of that. So if you have some of those questions on your mind, we can talk about it some today, but also know we're going to have another meeting in the spring just for that. So thank you very much.
And my name's Elise Puja. I am a third year in the counseling psych program. And I also did the master's program here as well, so that was kind of helpful for me to see what that transition is like in terms of applying to a doc program at a school where you are already attending. So thank you so much to our panelists today for volunteering. We, from both people who wanted to attend and from our panelists, we got this overwhelming support that we were really surprised and very excited by. So we have a great opportunity here today. So today I'm just gonna, I have a few broad and general questions that we're gonna ask the panelists about differences between different degrees and a master's and a doctoral level, and also about things that you might want to be considering right now if you're thinking about applying to a doc program in the future. So some of the bigger questions that we tend to typically hear from people who are applying to a doc program. But first I'm just going to let the panelists introduce themselves. Maybe if you could just say your name and the program and just a little bit about your background so that students have context about where you're coming from.
Boy, I don't want to go first, but...
It doesn't have to be like, you can go wherever you want.
Michael Carson. I teach in the Graduate School of Professional Psychology and the Forensic Master's Program and the Doctoral Clinical Program. I went to Michigan for my doctoral degree a long, long time ago. I'm a 45th year student now. And I don't know what else.
You have a good sense of.
I have a lot of knowledge about our admissions process, and I don't really know how representative it is about other places in terms of getting in. I do feel like the field has changed a great deal, and maybe this is probably not what I'm supposed to be doing now, but I feel like we've become more bifurcated where there are so few PhD programs that provide good clinical training in clinical psychology. There are still PhD programs in counseling psychology that provide good clinical training, and then the PsyD programs are designed to do that, and some do and some don't. So I think that one has to weigh issues about money, which is important, and also to the extent to which you want to get good clinical training in thinking about a direction. So.
That's a good platform. Hi, everybody. Kim Gorgans, and I am a professor at the Graduate School of Professional Psychology also. I teach in the Forensic Master's Program and the Clinical PsyD Program. My background is neuropsychology and rehabilitation psychology, so I can weigh in pretty knowledgeably about admissions in those kinds of programs. I was part of the training conference for rehab psych, and without going too far afield, some of the specialty disciplines have a training conference that then dictates the doctoral competencies. So health psychology has one, neuropsychology has one, rehab psych has one. So so I can speak to admissions across those programs and the differences in PsyD, PhD, and certainly to admissions on this end. And then with colleagues around the country at other programs, we commiserate a lot. So so I think I could share some good insights.
And you're also on APA Council. So,
And I'm on APA Council of Representatives, that's right.
which is the board that oversees all of the APA programs and everything
Right.
APA related.
Right, so we work a lot with APAGs, and so have kind of a finger on the pulse of where the controversies and struggles are.
Wow. I don't do any of that. I'm a third-year doc student in the counseling psych program here, and sorry I'm running late. Had a nice lab meeting, and all the good stuff happened at the end, so I'm happy to try to answer questions you'll have at this point when you're trying to make decisions about choosing a program or a concentration or whatever. Yeah, that's it for me.
And you got your master's here.
And I got my master's here. Thanks, Jesse.
I just know everybody's CVs. That's what I do. So most of you know me. I'm Jesse. I'm a professor in the counseling psych department, and I have done a lot of different things in terms of training programs. I've been a site visitor for accreditation programs for counseling and clinical programs, and I have played many different roles. So hopefully I can be helpful in this discussion.
My name is Ariel Modis. I'm a fourth-year doc student in the Child, Family, and School Psychology program. I also got my master's here. Seeing as I'm not faculty, I don't know all that much about the admissions process, but I have sat in on interview sessions and informed Dr. Raines, who is my advisor, my opinion of people coming in, and we do have some really nice conversations about what we're looking for. I hope that I can answer as many questions as you have, and if you would like to link up with a professor in my program, hopefully I can help facilitate that as well.
Okay, thank you. So we got a diverse panel here. So I think for the first question, if maybe just like a few of you want to answer, and we'll kind of buff around in the questions. But I think it would just be helpful to first explain like what you see as the differences between a master's level degree and a doctoral level degree, because I think some people are looking for, you know, I'm getting my master's right now, I don't know, should I move on to a doctoral level degree? If I don't, what are my options? So if you can kind of speak to some differences that you see between those and the career options that are available, that would be really helpful.
I'm ready to go on this one. So for me, there are two big issues. One is autonomy and one is expertise. For autonomy, I find that many people practice with a master's degree. You get to do almost everything people with doctoral degrees get to do, including now even testify in court. But you may end up feeling like you want more autonomy than that, and even more status to go along with it. And so then I think that if you know that about yourself, you may want to just go ahead and get a doctoral degree, and if you don't, then you may find out that you feel frustrated by some of that. The other issue for me is expertise. I just said hi to Jen Gafford, and I asked her if she had a forensic portfolio as a faculty member here, and she said, no, not really. And I think when you have a doctoral degree, it's a lot easier to present yourself as an expert in more than one thing. And when you have a master's degree, if you can present yourself as an expert in even one thing, it's a good thing. And if you find that you not only have that kind of mind and set of interests that you want to be, broad-based and varied, you'll find that the doctoral degree supports that performance a lot more than a master's degree does.
You guys, I'm just going to jump in because this is the dynamic that Michael and I always have. So Michael's my work husband, and he always answers with the cerebral, intellectual answer, and then I get all hung up on the granular details. So, so that was perfect. And I'm just going to add for the statute in Colorado, and Jesse and I are on a task force really in Colorado, but nationally looking at master's level licensure and practice. So this conversation will be totally different next year. It will be totally different a year from now. In Colorado, it's likely to be different at the end of 2020 when the practice law for master's level folks sunsets and revisions, which are happening right now, will be instated. So in Colorado, master's level folks were really scrappy, and doctoral level folks were not doing a great job of kind of carving out their area of practice. So in Colorado, the scope of practice for master's level licensed clinicians is actually identical to doctoral practice, with the exception of a battery with 3 or more neuropsychological tests or projective personality tests. Like literally in terms of like what you can do with a master's degree, it's everything short of that. And so it's fuzzy on whether or not that means you can't use any neuropsych tests or a battery of more than 3, because the statute is kind of fuzzy like that. So if you're aiming for clinical practice, like Michael said, there's like really every job is available to you, and the landscape nationally is such that master's level providers, because there are more of them, and they just seem more politically inclined, have mobilized to really carve out increasingly large scopes of practice. So the doctoral practice gets kind of smaller. I think the holdouts for doctoral practice, faculty positions at universities, in some cases, right, if you wanted to be credentialed as like the be-all, end-all expert in some area of research, maybe having a PhD or a PsyD or EDD can be helpful. But for anyone who's on the fence and thinks like, I want to hang a shingle and do clinical work, really there's nothing that you can't do with that shingle that you need a doctoral degree for.
So from the student perspective, especially when I was in the master's degree program here, and thinking through some of these options professionally, I guess I almost wanted to say that it's a matter of how many hats do you intend to wear in the future, or would you like to be able to put on in the future as far as roles go. But at the same time, it might also just be like, how adjustable do you want this hat to be? Do you want to be able to not only see clients, but also give assessments, but that's changing as well? Do you want to teach classes and also see clients and do research? For me, having more opportunity, more options going forward was an important thing to sort of aim for. And I also liked the rigor of graduate school, so that's another good indicator. If you are in the master's program and now you're thinking this is not something I enjoy doing, it does not get easier. It's not going to get easier. For me, anyways. Maybe for some folks it feels that way, but that hasn't been my experience.
I don't think you're alone.
Yeah, I don't either. I haven't met anyone who thought it got a lot easier, but otherwise as far as practice goes and clinical stuff, especially practicum and the PhD practicum, you tend to see more severe presenting issues. You have a lot more autonomy, and they really expect you to know what you're doing with your master's training at that point.
Just to add in a couple thoughts, we did this analysis, at least in Pennsylvania when I was working there. It's about $30 an hour is the difference between a master's and a PhD for some insurance panels. We looked at like 3 or 4, and the going rate at that time was about $65 to $70 for master's reimbursement rate, and for PhD or doctoral degree, it was around $100, depending on the insurance panel. And that was 10 years ago, so who knows what it is now. But I don't think that's too far askew of what is probably happening today, about a $20 to $30 difference per hour. And so you can do the math on how much how many different clients you'd have to see to make up that differential. So the scope of practice might be similar, but the actual reimbursement is a little bit different between the master's and doctoral. From a real pragmatic, if you think about feeding yourself and your family.
Until master's folks manage to get on like the CMS panel and change all of that, right?
Yeah, things are changing for sure. But there's, but yeah, that's,
Mhm.
and I think I like the idea of specialties and like what kind of hats do you want to
Right.
wear.
That's such a good point.
So coming from a school psychology perspective, I feel that it has been my impression that with a master's in school psychology, you can't really do much. We offer 3 different degrees: master's, education specialist degree, which is 2 years of graduate school and then a full year internship, and then a doctoral degree. So really the choice for me and for other students coming from this lens is, am I going to be an EDS or a PhD? I think it's really hard to break out of the school role as an education specialist. I do know a few practitioners who have that degree who have gone on to do clinical work, but that was a big thing for me. I do want to do clinical work. I've had proctoring experiences at a university counseling center, and right now I'm at Denver Health, and I've seen that there has been such a huge gap between serving our students in the schools and serving students in a hospital setting or some alternative setting, and I feel that my position there is really significant because I can help bridge that gap. So I think there are major differences in terms of coming from my degree. I'm not sure how I can speak to it from a PsyD, well not a PsyD, but a clinical or counseling master's to a PhD, but there are significant differences from EDS to PhD.
Okay, thanks. I think that's helpful because it seems like it does vary a little bit by where you're coming from in terms of your degree. I want to introduce our new panelist, Chrissy. I'll let her introduce herself.
I'm in the counseling psychology PhD program. I am a 3rd year. I wasn't here at the beginning, so I don't know if there's other things that you want me to say about myself or.
No, it's good. Yes,
Okay.
Background. Yeah. I'm wondering if, as a panel, if some of you can speak to the differences between the 3 different degrees that we have represented here. So, a PhD in counseling psych, or a CSFP, or having a PsyD. Because it sounds like as you've been speaking, there are a lot of overlaps, but there are differences, and that could be helpful to think through what makes your program or degree unique in terms of either what you can do or what the program emphasizes.
I can start with this one. I think that, so we are not APA approved. We have a site visit scheduled for April 2019. So I think that that will give us a lot more overlap with the programs also on this panel. So our program has changed so much over the past couple of years. It really aligns with APA accreditation work because that's what we're going for. I do think that a PhD in school psychology differs from a counseling or clinical perspective in that there's a lot more emphasis on systems level work. So especially if you, and also if you want to work with children. You know, I have done some work with adults, but our degree is 0 to 21. So if you want to work with adults, I would say don't go for a PhD in school psychology, which I've kind of learned the hard way in some ways. But because we have so much emphasis on the school and, you know, this system's perspective, if you want to bridge the gap between politics and psychology, I think that this could be a really great avenue to go on. And we are definitely advocacy and social justice oriented, which I think is across all of the programs, but just maybe in a different way and more of like a selective view of children's access to mental health and family partnerships with schools. So although I do a lot of clinical work, I feel that even in my clinical settings, I'm still coming from that systems lens.
I can speak a little bit to that too. So feel like in the PhD program you get kind of more of a broad and generalist exposure to different theories and practices. And then I've had supervision by people who have completed the PsyD program, and it seems like there's like just a larger focus on that, where you get a lot more intense, more rigorous clinical exposure to different theories and practices. So I think that our PhD program does a really great job, but if you're looking to be more clinically oriented, then PsyD might give you a little bit more of that, because with the PhD there is more of a research emphasis as well.
Yeah, so most PhD programs have a dissertation requirement. I think most PsyD programs don't. We, for example, require a doctoral paper, which is a novel piece of scholarship, but is not anything like a dissertation, which is in some ways designed to move an understanding of a problem forward, you know, one just notable difference. It's easier to get into PsyD programs, not necessarily ours. Ours is highly competitive. We have a 11% admit rate off the street and 75% admit rate from our own master's programs. But there are many PsyD programs that are much less difficult to get into. PsyD programs are less difficult to get out of. Almost everybody graduates on time. If you end up writing a dissertation, it's going to have a lot more to do with what problem you choose to work on and what your own attitude towards that work is. I think that's generally true. And then in the clinical world now, I believe that any doors that are open to PhDs are open to PsyDs. Neuropsych may be still a little stickier, but in the non-clinical world, I think there's still more cachet to a PhD. There are people with PsyDs on, you know, faculties at colleges and working in hospitals and doing high-level consultations. But I do feel like there's still a little bit, or even sometimes a lot, of curiosity about what the PsyD is as opposed to the PhD. And then the last thing I want to say is that one thing that I noticed about myself, and I don't know if this is true of other people, but I feel like the day after I graduated, it didn't matter what school I went to. It kind of evaporated. And then licensed psychologists replaced, you know, all the issues about which school you went to. And I was in practice for 25 years. And I think that's still largely true. So to me, one of the biggest issues, though, is that many PhD programs are free, and I think there's only 2 PsyD programs, not including ours. Ours is not free by any means. But I think there's only 2 that are free, and so it's a factor. You know, I don't know, if I think of my own kids taking on that kind of debt, it makes me scratch my head, but you know, our graduates take on a lot of debt, and they seem to do fine with it.
I think the other piece, just to think through, is I think there's some distinctions, obviously, if you want to work in schools and kids, or if you don't. Some of those pieces are important, but I also think it's important about fit. And so there are some programs that are great at training folks, and there's some programs where you're one of, you know, 100 or 200 in a cohort. And literally, there's some programs out there that are putting out 300 graduates a year into the system. And some of that is because some programs, and we haven't really touched on this, are for-profit, right? And so when we think about what a for-profit university does versus a not-for-profit, or you can start to see some differences. And one practical one, we did a study on who gets internship placements at the doctoral level, and there was about 10 programs that accounted for most of the people who were not placed. And out of those 10, a lot of, I think probably about half of those, if not more, were for-profit companies that were putting out substantially more graduates that were not, or they actually were graduates, they were not getting placed at a pretty high rate. And we're talking about, you know, 100 out of 300 getting placed for internship. Like, that's a huge And then, right, because then you're applying again the next year, and you're delaying your graduation for a year, and if you don't get placed next year, 2 years out. And so there's some real pieces to understanding the specifics about the university and the program. I think the other piece that is true across PsyD and PhD programs is who are the faculty that you want to work with, and what kind of specialties do they have that you want to gain, right? So it goes back to what hat do you want to wear. If you really want a great training in neuropsych, coming to the counseling psych program here at DU is not the greatest place for you. We have 0 faculty who do that, right? But if you want to go work with Kim, right, you're going to get some great training. You're going to get some real hands-on experience. You're going to be able to leverage kind of her contacts here in the community and the projects she does, and that's going to be a great experience, right? So really think about who is available in faculty and what expertise they bring.
Jesse, I think that's a good leeway into our next question, which is, what are some of the things that you would recommend that students are doing now if they want to apply to a doctoral program? So like, what are the types of experiences that you're looking for that qualified candidates can come in with?
Our admissions process is pretty haphazard. A lot depends on who reads the essay. I've done a lot of in-house evaluation of our admissions process. For example, I demonstrated that grade point average in college is not predict outcomes, but people who did well in college still look for high grade point averages. I flunked out of college, so I'm cheered by the fact that undergraduate grade point average doesn't predict anything, and don't look for it. I think that people who got a lot of experience before they went to a doctoral program look for a lot of experience. People like me, who I started when I was, 21, don't think it's annoying when people have a lot of experience. So we all have our own predilections, but then we have to teach them everything that they know is wrong instead. And I think that's true in a lot of places, that in some ways it's haphazard, but in general I think that there's still a lot of emphasis on how you present yourself, which is our main emphasis, is our essay, and then a lot of emphasis on GREs and so on. And I think that that's probably still true in most places.
Yeah, the buzzkill is like GRE, right? It's the worst test. I teach measurement, so I teach about how terrible a test it is. It's the worst test, but we still use it. It matters. It matters more at the PhD level. Matters less for us, but we still sort. It's one of the...
It was a good predictor.
And really low GRE scores were more predictive of struggles in grad school. So especially for my master's advisees, if they have really strong GREs and they're talking to me about a PsyD program, I'm like, I won't even allow you to go to a PsyD program if you can go to a program that will pay you to go to school. So, and unfortunately that degree of competitiveness is dictated almost entirely by GRE, because you guys are all smart, right? It's like you're a little truncated sample of smart overachievers at the master's level, and it matters a lot.
We also found that our master's students going on to PhD programs, having one publication or one poster in a conference really didn't help at all. So we stopped having a required master's thesis for that reason. But what we found did help is either working in a really vibrant research lab for a few years, and then you are being presented by the principal investigator in some way, or having a close relationship with one of our faculty, not me, Kim, or Neil, who actually know a lot of researchers around the country, and then if that relationship develops as a research-oriented relationship, then that grapevine can help with admissions into a PhD program.
Yeah, one thing, so we wrote a chapter on selecting doctoral students and selecting interns, right? So we read the literature on both ends, and a lot of the things that are being said are really true. GREs for PhD programs predict how people do in quantitative classes, but there's really nothing that predicts well how people are going to do clinically, which is kind of
They did for us.
Did they really?
Yeah, almost shockingly well.
On the low end, right?
No, with a cutoff.
Interesting. Letters of recommendation are important, and I think that kind of relates to this pipeline of like who's able to talk about what you do. And clinically, obviously, you're going to have some good experiences with folks in the field, right? Your supervisors or other colleagues at the practicum and internship places that you're at. But academically, you're going to need somebody to be able to talk about your experiences. And I think as you think about the program, even here at University of Denver, our master's program, you're going to have a lot of different instructors. Some are going to be adjuncts, some are going to be full professors. So how do you get yourself connected to professors who are doing research, or how do you jump on somebody's research team so they can talk about what you're doing from an academic place? And so when we're reading letters of recommendation, which are also a horrible predictor of admissions and how people do, but if you have a bunch of letters of recommendation from no core faculty from your program, that's going to raise a little bit of a flag of like, why does this person not have any professors in their actual program writing a letter of recommendation for them? And that's it raises more questions. It doesn't necessarily answer them by any means, but people, that's the discussion at the selection committee level is like, well, that's kind of interesting.
I think for our program, pairing yourself up with a faculty that you're really interested in the work that they're doing is so important. If you're applying to our program and you want to study, I'll use that example, neuropsych, there's no one on our faculty who does that. But if you want to partner with refugee communities or work on the school-to-prison pipeline, we have faculty who do extensive research on that, and our program here has a vertical research team. So, if you're already in the CFSP program and you're not on one of those research teams, and then you're applying to a PhD, it's like, why aren't you, trying to put yourself there? I would say if you're coming from a different type of background, just demonstrating that your interests align to one of the faculty is really important.
I think that point right there is really true, because there's some students, like this happened back when I was at University of Louisville. We had a student with 2 or 3 publications. She had a great research portfolio. She had all these presentations, and we didn't admit her because she wanted to study Latinx populations that are in the military. And we had no faculty that were studying anything around that area. Even though she was bright, she was great, and the reason why we didn't admit her is that we didn't have the expertise to help her. And so we just know from an experience factor that if you come in wanting to study a certain thing that nobody studies, that's not, like, we really kind of think about this as like, how can I help you develop expertise, and what is my expertise to help you? And so it doesn't have to be a one-to-one perfect fit, but it's got to be in the ballpark. If it's not in that ballpark, then from a faculty lens, it's like, well, there's probably another place you can go that will probably be a better fit for you. And it's just really frustrating from the student experience if you're trying to study something and the faculty are like, that could be a cool idea, but who knows? And I've actually had students where I picked them up because the faculty has left, and I've been trying to catch up with them, and like one student, it delayed his graduation a full year because we were both, it was hard for him to really do even the lit search process because he didn't know enough about the area. I didn't know enough about the area, so it was just one of those things that has real consequences at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you. And then I think our last question that I have prepared for you all, and then we'll turn it over to students, is can you talk about the differences in funding between the programs? So we had 2 questions that were sent to us asking about funding. One was just about what are the differences between each different degree, the level of funding you get. And secondly, what does funding look like if you're an international student?
Well, our program is the same if you're international or domestic, which is you write the University of Denver a whopping amount of money and a check, and we get half of it.
The program gets out.
The program gets out. We don't get it.
That would be awesome.
I used to say that.
I was like, I'm transferring.
It costs you. costs you $40,000 a year to get the University of Denver on your diploma, and it costs us $40,000 a year to get the University of Denver on our business card.
That's funny. Yeah, it comes down to student support. There's different tracks of student support. So a traditional mechanism of funding at the PhD level is tuition remission and a stipend. So in some cases, you might be attached to someone's research funding, so you get a position in their lab, and so you get an assistantship, and maybe that's 8 hours or 10 hours a week, and then your tuition is fully paid, and you get some monthly amount. There's like a whole continuum on that assistantship and tuition remission area, from full to 1 or 2 credits at a time. I think we have a couple of assistantships, and they're like 2.5 credits each. And then on the full fare side, there's the pay out of pocket. There's the private grants. There's trying to capitalize on every scholarship available. So I think you guys do a better job with that. We have one diversity scholarship that funds one student fully in our program. So, if you're looking at a program that you're paying out of pocket for, there's several other pots of money that you might look at that could offset some of those costs.
Yeah, I was going to say so a lot of PhD programs offer some funding. Most PhD programs, and counseling psych at least, do not fully fund. And the ones that typically do are generally connected to psych departments. So counseling psych programs either live in colleges of education like us, or they live in psych departments. And psych departments are able to fund their students a little bit better because you will end up teaching undergrad classes, right? So their massive revenue is coming from undergrad students. In a college ed, we have no undergrad program, and so we don't have any source of revenue that comes in from undergraduate students. And so there's less money for us to be able to reimburse. We do have some funding for our students, and a lot of programs right now have about 1 to 2 years covered, or at least partially covered, and some programs have up to 3 to 4. But it's very, very difficult to find those programs that will do fully funded. The other option for funding through PhD programs is to, when you're investigating researchers or the faculty there, is to see what kind of research they're doing and see if they have grant-funded positions associated with it. So I know some of my colleagues, where our program doesn't fund their students, a friend of mine funds all of his students 100% because he has these NIH grants for the next 5 to 10 years. And so he just, when he admits students, he's like, "You're on my grant for the next 5 years, is that cool?" And go fund them. So that's another way to kind of investigate, like, okay, there's this person who's doing this research, are they research active is what we say. Because there's a lot of faculty who have research interest, but if there's somebody research active, that means they're publishing stuff each year. It means you'll see a grant section on their CV. Those are the types of things to take a look for.
And the other area of funding that I didn't mention is like military scholarships. So we have usually at least one student a year who, there's like an Air Force and is it a Navy? John Mallory maybe was Navy. So you agree to a 4-year stint as an officer, and your entire graduate program is funded. So
there's also payback programs.
Right.
Like the National Health Service Corps is one. If you commit to working in an area that's has like a shortage of providers for a certain number of years, that can often reimburse you for your tuition loans.
Yeah.
That's especially appealing. Like, we had a student who was from Eastern Washington State, and then she went back home and turned out to be living in an underserved place, and they paid back $60,000 a year for her. No, $25,000 a year for her thing, but she's planning on staying permanently. So
I do want to say that politically that's been changing lately, and they're offering less and less of those. So some people who went into graduate programs expecting to be able to use that to pay back both at the master's and doctoral level, it's just becoming a lot more competitive. So it's not a guaranteed thing. Know that it is an option, but you have to apply for it. Some people apply after a couple of years and get it. Some people get it right away, some people never get it. So
You guys should be watching for that for the elections, though, for real, and voting for that, because like the loan forgiveness is always a conversation that politicians don't have unless you press them to do it. So you guys should hold them to the fire.
It's been my impression that we function very similarly to the counseling PhD. There is a major shortage of doctoral level school psychologists, and I'm constantly being pressured to go into faculty positions because we're getting emails every single day. So I think there may be more opportunities to get fully funded positions in a school psych PhD program. I know 2 colleagues of mine are in University of Oregon and somewhere in South Carolina, and they're getting paid, they're fully funded, and they're also getting some money from it. So I can't speak to it on a national basis, but there are opportunities out there.
I was going to say, the other thing when you're investigating doctoral programs is not only the graduate tuition remission, which is obviously the big bulk of cash, but also check out what their stipends are. So a lot of universities, stipends range from anywhere, like for like a full-time graduate assistant, their stipends end up being somewhere between $16,000 and $24,000 on average, which is, depending on where you're living, not a lot to live off of. And so you might be taking out loans just to live versus to pay the tuition.
That's a good point.
And sometimes you might be doing both. So.
Thank you. That's really helpful because I know, at least for me when I was applying, that was like that funding was like a big decision maker in which program I decided to apply to.
And to the international question, I think that's going to be very specific to the universities and what kind of university level support folks have. But for folks who are international students, I think the important piece would be to also reach out to the internationalization office, because most universities have some kind of version of that office where they'll know more about what kind of services are available.
Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful.
And then in the interview process, ask what other kind of on-campus jobs are there, because international students can't work outside the university. And so asking just
That's a really good point.
Yeah, just to double check.
I didn't know that. That's a good tip there, Jesse.
Department chair knowledge comes in handy.
Yeah. I think at this point, what we'll do is we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So feel free to just jump in and raise your hand.
For those of y'all who are students, current PhD students that attended, you got your master's degree here. What was your reasoning for applying and pursuing PhD programs here at DU specifically?
So I believe it's Jeremy, because I came in with a bachelor's degree and I didn't do my master's here. So I'll let you take that one.
It was a faculty member that I wanted to continue working with. I think I sometimes question my decision because, as I said, there are other PhD programs across the country that I know people, they're there and they're not paying a dime. But I'm working on my dissertation. I'm proposing on Tuesday, and that faculty member has been by my side. And it's important to have that support and really be working with someone that is going to push you and believe in you, because when you're, I'm putting a paper out there that's like my idea and a hole in a research, and there's been so many times like, is this actually important? And it's really important to have that, that faculty member be like, yes, if you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it. So that's why.
For me, it was more than just what I wanted to do, because I have a significant other and I would like them to remain that way. So if the options are, my options, one was in Columbia, Missouri. I don't know if anyone's ever been there.
That's a great place to live.
No doubt, if I'm going by myself, my significant other's career would not flourish there. Her dreams would be foreclosed on so that mine could flourish. So that's an important thing to take into consideration. UC Santa Barbara was like 3 times as expensive as Denver, and I can barely live here. So now that's not it wasn't like, oh, process of elimination, I guess I'll stay here. There was also, I had a lot of good relationships with the faculty. I knew and understood the system. The quarter system was something I got adjusted to. And again, it kind of matched that pace that I enjoy. And I enjoyed. I no longer enjoy it as much. Oh, I wish we had semesters. But there were a lot of factors that come into play. So not just the offers that you get, the funding's important, the relationships, where you're going to be, what your life will look like, all that stuff is important to consider.
I want to answer that question too by going back to what Jesse said about fit. I used to believe that you could go to any program that was convenient or well-funded and then pick up whatever it was that you originally dreamed of doing. But now I feel like that's not true. And I look at myself and I think I'm such a creature as a psychologist of the program I went to. And I feel like that's true generally, that after 4 years of indoctrination, brainwashing, or education, whatever you want to call it, you end up reflecting the program you went to. So I do now believe that you really have to think about what you want to become and how likely you are to be affected by the environments you expose yourself to, positively or negatively.
I would also like to add on, I know I'm not a panelist, but I'm just going to give my advice. I would echo everything that Jeremy said about this, like the fit was really, really important to me, and I felt lucky to be in the master's program ahead of time, so I kind of almost got to like test out what the environment was and if I liked it, and I felt like I had really supportive relationships with faculty. One thing that I don't think I realized until I was in the middle of the application process was for me, I felt like being in a city was a little bit better for me in terms of the opportunities I had for training. So I remember I applied to like a state school in Nebraska, and they had like 3 practicum sites that you could go to. And it just didn't seem like I had a ton of options for practicum training, especially because like 2 of them were in, like, speaking to the fit area, like areas I wasn't interested in. And I felt like here in Denver, I feel like our program, at least in CP, has like great relationships with a ton of different practicum sites in a ton of different areas, and that was really, I wanted to have access to a bunch of different resources. Any other questions?
This is probably mostly going to be directed at Kim and Michael, but coming from the forensic program, how related to like forensic studies can going into the PsyD program be? Like, does that, obviously it would take away some of that focus on like forensics, but how can you continue on that path?
Mm-hmm.
So some people actually do it, Jen Gafford did, and develop a whole different interest. I'm not that you went to our program, but I just mean I still like you can be a forensic psychologist and a clinical psychologist. But most of people, we tell them, just pretend you're interested in clinical psychology. And an uncanny number of them work with Kim, take Levita's seminar and my seminar, and basically never meet the clinical faculty.
And you could build we call it a specialty focus tool, which is such a dumb term, but like it's a minor concentration or anything that makes more sense. But you guys might be surprised as you're looking at doc programs by how varied those opportunities are. And forensic is one of our off-the-shelf specialty focus tools. Like, it's easy, it's tons of students have done it, you know, it kind of is formulaic in the approach and how to plan it, and depending on how far afield you wanted to go, you could build your own. Yeah, that's a good question though.
I'm still learning the ins and outs of licensure as a master's CP student, but as far as looking at out-of-state schools you're applying to, do you have to consider how licensure standards overlap, or does it just work out, or how does that work?
So the nice thing at the doctoral level, and you can jump in.
Yeah.
The nice thing at the doctoral level, the licensed psychologist route typically is a little bit more transferable.
Okay.
Easily transferable. There are different licensure laws per state for psychologists, and that typically relates to postdoc hours. Some states require postdoc hours, some states don't, and I think that's one of the bigger divides.
Say something about APA accreditation.
Oh yeah, and APA accreditation. So the notion that most clinical and counseling programs that are accredited help you get licensure easier as well. So if you're going to a program that is going for accreditation, you should really ask the questions about like where are they at in that process? Because there's a lot of programs that say they're going for accreditation, but they are 5 years away or 6 years away. And if that's the case, that's very different of jumping into a program like that versus a program that's about ready to have a site visit, and that's typically a good sign. In terms of the master's, like if you're thinking about getting a doctoral degree, wherever you don't necessarily need to get licensed at the master's level while you're in your doctoral program. Most programs don't require that. If you do, then your options for actually earning money in your doctoral program increase, obviously. But it doesn't make you more competitive to be licensed walking into a doctoral program per se. Is that
Yeah. The accreditation piece, there's a real push at the doctoral level to get more universal licensure across the country. There's a board that the acronym is ASPPB, but is really working to standardize licensure so there's more portability for psychologists. The licensure landscape at the master's level is like a total shit show, right? Like that is like, it's like the Wild West. Like every state is totally different. So I wouldn't even make eye contact with licensure at the master's level if you're in a doc program. Like just assume that headache, you know, unless it's like handed to you, that I would even worry about it.
Yeah. So if you did have your licensure, if you got that master's level licensure and then went and did a doctoral program, from like a workload balance perspective, from both PhD and PsyD, how would you describe how possible that is to work and do the program?
It's possible, but what we've noticed is that sometimes people get their license and they may get a paid field placement or be able to capitalize it in some way other than having a separate job.
Right, so you get mileage out of it, right? The job that you're getting paid to do is also your practicum, your required practicum.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Although that does remind me of another issue, which is, for example, our doctoral program is 135 credits, but people with master's degrees can count 45 credits from their master's degree if they apply to our doctoral program. So that's something else to think about in terms of expenses. Your master's degree may save you some money in that respect as well.
And great to that question. We've also seen that varies by university too. Because it depends on what role you're in at the job that you have.
Okay.
Right, because your supervisor needs to supervise your hours at the doctoral level. And so if you're working and let's say you're in a private practice and you don't technically have a supervisor, or your supervisor doesn't actually have control over your cases, which a lot of private practice, that's kind of how the setup goes, right?
Yeah.
Like group practice, you might be getting supervised by a colleague. Is that really a colleague? Like in terms of ethical issues, you know, Gafford can walk you through that. But like that. But I think those are the other considerations and why some programs just say, hey, if you have a job, you have a job, and here's your practicum, which makes that a little bit more difficult to manage those two. So that definitely varies by program.
Well, and I was going to say too, I'm not sure what practicum sites the PsyD has access to, but like last year I was at Metro State University and they pay, but it's minimum wage. So you may be able to get paid, but from my impression it's not very much. Like it's not going to pay my rent.
Yeah.
But I assume that in any program, some sites are recruited by the program and some are recruited by the student. You know, you're basically offering free labor, and if you do have a license, you're more likely to be able to knock on the door of a clinic and say you want to provide, you know, labor in exchange, and it's not worthless.
Yeah.
Right? We have some people who stay in Colorado so the license is easy to get, and then in their third year of the doctoral program have a very light course load because they've waived 45 credits, and then they may just make some money working in that third year with their license.
Right, and you're tracking those hours, those are all hours towards internship. You guys track that also towards requirements at the MA level, but you know, you'll track every single hour in a doc program, and it just makes you more competitive for internship.
So speaking of people that are in the field, and this might be more forensics focused as well, I'm hearing a lot that hiring wise, people are looking for PhDs over masters, and that people are telling me it's so competitive that you have to go for your PhD because you won't get hired at a master level. And then I'm also finding out that a lot of people don't know what a PsyD is. And they're like, what's a PsyD? And you're like, well, it's kind of like a PhD, but more clinical practice focused. Is that, can you guys weigh in on that a little bit? Because that's kind of,
all of our master's grads either go to doctoral programs or get jobs. So there must be enough jobs.
Right, but what about the ones that don't go on? Do you see them struggle to get employed?
No.
Okay.
No. But your question about the PsyD, I mean, it's our world, so we're like, well, of course we know what a PsyD is, but I don't think there's any more confusion about a PsyD than someone wondering, you know, like, what does JD stand for? Like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, it's an opportunity for you to have a conversation about, here's the kind of degree I have, here's my training. So I would not even worry that you have to explain it, because they're also going to get PhD wrong, you know,
Right.
like in terms of what they think it is.
But overall, with the job competition, you don't see that if someone decided to go for their master's, that they then kind of.
No.
Okay.
We won't be applying for the same job
Right.
as
Exactly.
people with doctoral degrees.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jesse was saying the doctoral jobs are going to pay more,
Right.
but
But there's jobs out there, is what I'm
yeah.
going for. Yeah.
Totally.
Okay. Can I take that chair?
So I think the other piece of within the field, like, folks know what a PsyD is. Outside of the field, nobody knows what any of us really
Right, right.
So,
I
mean, I was thinking about my private practice. Somebody called me up and asked me, so I'm really in need of meds. Can you prescribe me some meds? And I was like, no. I'm like, but they're like, you're a doctor. And I was like, yep. Not that kind of doctor.
Yeah.
So like,
right, exactly.
So, who knows?
So Ariel, between PsyD and PhD and becoming a school psychologist, do you find any difference within schools hiring those kinds of psychologists?
Not to my knowledge. I know that there's a PsyD program at CU Denver. And I think that the major differences that I've heard is just like connections within the Denver community. So what prac sites do you have access to? I think the coursework plan looks fairly similar. Yeah.
You mentioned people coming in with masters or previous degrees getting some of their credits in the PhD program covered. Do you see people coming from different avenues of psych doing that as well, like coming from school psych and getting some clinical psych credits covered?
it depends on the program though. You know, I think it was Pepperdine where we sent a student and they said, no, you start from scratch, no credits count. That may have changed in the interim, but for us, any master's degree has the potential of waiving some credits. And then there's a separate issue of waiving particular courses, depends on whether the professor thinks you've essentially taken that course before, but that's a separate issue.
And that's the same thing for our doctoral program. And most doctoral programs in counseling psych, they'll waive, there's a set number of credits by the university that you have to hit, but the actual course coverage, most programs don't want you to just retake courses to retake courses.
If you're more interested in like practice and possibly like teaching, do you think that it's better to just stay with a master's degree or to move on? Like, because I'm not necessarily interested in research, I don't really know yet, but
What kind of teaching are you interested in?
I think it would be cool to teach maybe undergrads or something.
We had one grad get a teaching job with a master's degree at a community college in Midwestern state. I can't remember which one, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah, if you want to adjunct teach, like pick up a class here or there, even at the undergrad level, chances are you're going to need a doctoral degree. And then that doctoral degree doesn't necessarily have to be a PhD. It can also be a PsyD.
Right.
Yeah.
Which may be a better fit for you on the clinical side.
Yeah, we sell education, so it looks weird when we say it doesn't matter. Entry into the teaching profession.
Yeah, but I think that issue of like on the hiring side, like when I was a department chair and hiring adjuncts in, what I would be looking for is what is your expertise to teach this class?
Mm-hmm.
Not so much your teaching experience teaching it, but rather, right, we had an excellent person teaching our eating disorders class until her practice picked up too much, which is unfortunate, but she was an eating disorder expert. And so the fact that she only taught like once or twice before was irrelevant, because I know that she's going to be able to bring those clinical experiences into the classroom in a way that somebody else probably couldn't.
But you clearly love the classroom, so it should be a great stint, right?
Well, I think
staying for a doc is good.
And in pursuing your doctoral degree, you'll have the opportunity, at least at this university, to teach undergrads. I know that a lot of students from your program have taught different classes to undergrads.
Yeah, I was hoping I would maybe get to like if I was a master's student, but they said they don't that. So
Yeah. Most universities have a rule that you have to be one level higher than the people you're teaching. So you have to have a degree one level higher than the people you're teaching. So if you want to teach undergrad, you have to at least have a master's degree. If you want to teach masters, you have to have a doctoral degree. A lot of universities have that, some kind of policy on that. I think community colleges are uniquely different in that way.
Okay, so I think we want to respect everyone's time. It is noon. So I think to that end, we are going to end the panel for today. You guys are welcome to stay around. Panelists, if you want to stay and answer some more questions, you're welcome to. But I also want to be respectful of time and officially end the panel now.
As a reminder, we're going to do this as part 2 in the spring. So we'll definitely have more support for you as you go along your discernment process of your career path.
So thank you to our
Thanks,
panel.
guys.
Thank you very much.